Right, some of the thoughts of the guests we've already heard from in our coverage from Davos. Let's bring in a man who's a real expert in this field, Guy Ryder, Director-General of the ILO. Thanks, Guy, for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
You know, we talked about how there's a better sentiment around Europe in terms of the markets and the effects of the ECB, but you just take a look at the unemployment numbers in Spain and no turnaround at all there. What are the long-term impacts of what we're seeing?
Well, the impacts are catastrophic. As you've just been hearing, we've got levels of unemployment in Spain which I think are very difficult for any of us to imagine the social effects of. What is, I think, quite worrying is that I think the mood here in Davos is that the financial situation in Europe is turning the corner. There's a good deal of optimism about that. But what I keep very much in mind is the situation on labour markets is getting worse. Globally, we estimate that we added over 4 million to the unemployment queues around the world in 2012. And the bad news is, for 2013, it's even worse, 5 million more. So I think we really have to be very, very careful that we don't focus exclusively on the financial aspects, although getting that right is absolutely vital. We need also, I think, now more than ever, to pay much greater attention to the job situation.
Yes, and if you look at the big growth industries post-decade, financial services, enormous growth industry, grew too much. The reason we've got this financial crisis. But then when you hear, you hear CEO after CEO coming in, Mr. Jenkins this morning from Barclays, Anthony Jenkins, saying, look, we've got to trim our cost base. We've got to make the cloth fit the environment we're in. So that's an industry that's only going to be shedding more jobs. I mean, where are the industries that are going to be creating them?
Well, I mean, I understand CEOs. They live in the real world. They live in the market conditions that policies and financial circumstances are generating. We actually need to get growth going. I'm a little bit worried when I hear people here saying, look, we'll get the finance right. I've heard it this morning. We'll get public finances back in order, and then we will turn to job and growth. I don't think we can wait that long, and I would point particularly to two elements in job markets which would worry us all enormously. One is the situation of young workers. We've heard in Spain, if you're under 25, you're more likely to be out of a job than in a job. Youth unemployment rates are generally 2 to 3 times higher than anybody else. And this notion of a lost generation, it sounds like a cliché. It's a reality, because everything shows that if at the beginning of your professional career you're out of the jobs market for 6 months to a year, you have a hell of a difficult time getting back in again. And that is a situation now of 1/3 of the young unemployed in Europe.
Well, why do you think policymakers have been so comfortable with the sack of unemployment?
Do you know, the question, the question I most frequently get asked about youth unemployment is this going to create social instability? Are we going to see an Arab revolution crossing the Mediterranean? And my answer to that is, if you've got 55–60% of young people out of work in your country, you have a social problem, you have a social stability threat. But let's not wait to get to the edge of the abyss in those terms to act. The real trigger for action should be that there's a massive waste of economic resources and human lives. So the moment to move actually was yesterday, but let's do it now. We saw
composite PMIs for the Eurozone a little bit higher today. There was one country that stood out in France. That composite PMI 42.7, the lowest since March 2009, much weaker than expected. Carlos Ghosn was speaking to us earlier, talking about the job cuts they're trying to come in. And he's saying, look, it's not, as we heard in that clip, it's a reduction, but there's another point is about improving production, bringing more work to France. What kind of particular problems does France have? Because it seems like its competitiveness is really declining at a much quicker rate.
Well, I think the new French government recognises there's an issue around competitiveness. I think the thing we should also look at is they've just achieved an agreement between employers, trade unions and the government on competitiveness. Very difficult negotiations took place, and I think it did something very good. It looked at the competitiveness agenda. France does need to step up its act there. But it also looked about what they call job security issues. That is to say, to get out of a situation or move away from an issue where 6 out of every 7 jobs or labour contracts signed in France today are for fixed duration, sometimes of 1 day. So I think we have to also look at the way that people are entering to job markets, not simply a quick fix for a few days. You've got to create situations in which people's situation on job markets are relatively secure. The industry, of course, creates very particular problems in France, but not just in France.
The automobile industry's done quite well in the UK, so I want to finish with seeing if you can answer the big quandary in employment. Tomorrow we're going to get the first print of UK GDP. Adam Posen is probably with the consensus saying it'll probably be a negative print. There's a sharp difference between the growth numbers, as we know, and your ILO measure of wider employment and the unemployment rates, which look extraordinarily strong. Give us your reason why there's such a disconnect.
You're looking for an answer to the UK jobs puzzle, and it's a tricky story. I think part of the answer, if you step away from the statistical differences, the way of measuring that may exist, is I think in the UK you've got a major move into part-time unemployment, which in some terms you could look at as underemployment. So the headline open unemployment figures have to be, I think, set in the context of that part-time, those more complex movements going on in labour markets. But there are issues there. And the UK automobile industry, to come back to that, there is some good news there.
Yeah, well,
in my hometown,
only one,
1,500 jobs, it's great.
Only 2 automobile industries in Europe actually improved sales last year, and the UK was one of them. I think the other one was in Sweden.
That's great. You look at the downside of all of this, and it links to the competitiveness agenda. When just over 4,000 jobs go in Belgium, Genk, and 1,600 are picked up of those in Spain, you've got a real danger that the competitiveness efforts being imposed or undertaken in Spain rebound to the disadvantage of other countries. Got to be very careful about not pushing things down competitively.
Good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for that. Guy Ryder from the ILO. We'll take a short break. Still to come.